From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Library of Congress. I am Grant Harris. I am Chief of the European Division. We are glad you are here for this event entitled Words, Images, and Music, a dialogue on Torquato, Tasso, and the arts at the Library of Congress. We sponsor this event in partnership with the Embassy of Italy and the Italian Cultural Institute here in Washington. Within the Library of Congress, the European Division is co-sponsoring with the Music Division and the Rare Book and Special Collections Division, both of which have provided really interesting treasures that we were able to show between 2 and 3 today. We wish we could keep them longer, but they have to get back to their divisions. Also co-sponsoring with us is the library's John W. Kluge Center, which is just in the rooms next door here. They've graciously let us use this room. We would also like to thank our wonderful speakers, Dr. Laura Benedetti of Georgetown University, who is originally from the Abruzzo region in Italy, in central Italy, and Dr. Peter Leuchart of the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts at the National Gallery of Art, a well-known art historian both in DC and abroad. Today's event celebrates the birth of the Italian Renaissance author Torquato Tasso, who was born on March 11 in 1544 in the town of Sorrento on the Gulf of Naples. He was the author of the epic poem, and I'm saying this in English because I don't have the Italian for this, or was this in Latin when it was first written? In Italian, okay. Jerusalem Delivered. That's one of the renderings in English. That's not the only rendering, but Jerusalem Delivered. Published in 1581, a work based on the history of the First Crusade. The library's collections hold at least 760 items in various formats concerning Torquato Tasso, and a good number are English translations of his main works, published in Britain and in the United States. We hope you have a pleasant time at the library today, and please come back to use the collections. The collections really are rich. The Italian collections are really incredible here. Please turn off your cell phones and recording devices for the duration of the program. Be aware that this is being recorded as a Library of Congress webcast. It's not live streaming, but someday, many weeks from now, it will be made available on our web pages. And I now give the floor to our specialist for Italy, Lucia Wolf, who has organized this event today. It's got lots of moving parts with all the great items that we were able to show earlier. Let me say also that some people have asked if those items will be on display in some way in the future, and there will be at least a list, and Lucia, I'll let you talk about that then. You'll mention that when you're up here, okay. Well, thank you for being here. I give you Lucia Wolf.
So I won't be long because they are the protagonists, and I'll cut to the chase. I had a longer, but thank you for being here for this wonderful occasion. I thought hosting an event to celebrate Torquato Tasso's birth month would be as good as any other occasion to introduce one of the greatest Italian Renaissance writers in our Italian program repertoire at the Library of Congress. And I will mention what Grant was referring to at the end, but before going any further, I want to thank all my colleagues who have made this event possible and have bared with me during the preparation of this event. You all know who you are. And most importantly, I would like to thank the Chief of the European Division, Grant Harris. Finally, I want to thank my husband. Maybe he's here. Okay, but That's okay. But he put up with a lot of long extra hours of work, so I decided to say thank you to him. I will not go over the library's collections too much because Grant has said most of what we needed to know today about the holdings for Torquato Tasso, but I would like to point out that there are more than 400,000 items in our Italian collections, and they are growing at the rate of 6,000 new acquisitions per year. So it is a very, very large collection. If you are interested in learning more about the Italian collections, please pick up a card. I put my business cards, leave an email if you prefer, and don't hesitate to contact me, and I will give you the best orientation I can. I'm still exploring the collections. I mean, 400,000 items are quite a few. We will do many programs to allow for that also. These are occasions for me, by the way, to really discover the collections and share what the bounty we have with you. So let us move on to our speakers, because we had a few logistical problems and technical that took up some time, and we want to give them all the time possible. Dr. Laura Benedetti has taught and currently teaches Italian literature at Georgetown University. She holds a laurea summa cum laude from the University of Rome La Sapienza, a master's from the University of Alberta, a PhD from Johns Hopkins University. She taught for 8 years at Harvard, where she became the John Loeb, I pronounce it like that, Associate Professor for the Humanities before joining Georgetown as the first Laura and Gaetano del Sole Professor of Contemporary Italian Culture. Her publications include La sconfitta di Diana, un percorso per la Gerusalemme liberata, The Tigress in the Snow, Motherhood and Literature in 20th Century Italy, the edition and English translation of Lucrezia Marinella's Esortazioni alle donne e agli altri, and most recently her first novel, Un Paese di Carta, about which we had a very vivacious talk here at the library last September. And if you want to enjoy it, you can go and watch the webcast. It's posted online. So let's move forward. She has been a guest of honor at annual meetings of the American Association of Italian Studies, as well as the recipient of the Flaiano International Prize for Italian Studies. She has also been awarded the Wise Woman Award for the National Organization of Italian American Women and the gold medal from Federazione Associazioni Abruzzesi negli USA. She is currently Associate Editor and Book Review Editor of Italian Culture, the Journal of the American Association of Italian Studies. And if you want to consult Dr. Benedetti's books, we have most of them, I think all of them, here at the library. Our next guest, Dr. Peter Lukart, is Associate Dean at the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts at the National Gallery of Art from 2001 to the present, where he has a special responsibility for the fellowship program. He received his PhD in art history from the Johns Hopkins University. From 1988 to 1990, he taught at George Mason University, another alma mater of mine, and then served as a Mellon Assistant Curator of the Southern Baroque painting at the National Gallery of Art from 1990 to 1992. From 1992 until 2001, he held a joint appointment at Dickinson College, where he was director of the college's museum, the Trout Gallery, and also assistant and then associate professor of art history. In 2000, Lukart organized the exhibition and related website, Writing on Hands, Memory and Knowledge in Early Modern Europe, which won the Dibner Award in the History of Science. He has a long-standing interest in the education and incorporation of artists in the early modern period. His publications on this subject include contributions to the exhibition catalog Taddeo and Federico Zuccaro, Artist Brothers in Renaissance Rome, and to the Artist's Workshop, published under his editorship in the Studies in the History of Art series at the National Gallery of Art. He also served as editor of the Accademia Seminars, for which he wrote the introduction and essay Visions and Divisions in the Early History of the Accademia di San Luca. He is project director for an online research database entitled The History of the Accademia di San Luca from 1590 to 1635, documents from Archivio di Stato di Roma. And please go and visit because it is beautiful. It is amazing. I went there and I have fond memories of Archivio di Stato.
It will soon grow to 1665.
Wonderful. I loved going there. In 2015, he contributed an essay entitled The Practice and Pedagogy of Drawing in the Accademia di San Luca to the volume, I do not really speak German, but Lernt Zeichnen, Techniken zwischen Kunst und Wissenschaft.
Jawohl.
Okay, did I do okay? The editors are Maria Heilmann, Nino Nanobashvili, Ulrich Pfisterer, and Tobias Teutenberg for the exhibition at the University of Heidelberg. And I think I got to the end. I wanted everybody to know what wonderful speakers we have here today, and this is really a rare occasion at the Library of Congress. Please enjoy. And the word to you.
Thank you very much, Lucia, for your kind introduction and for your hard work to make this event possible. Thanks. I also want to extend my thanks to all our sponsors. I also want to, of course, thank Peter Lukart, who is my brilliant partner in this adventure. And I also want to remember Alberto Manai, the former director of the Italian Cultural Institute, who first introduced us to one another and who was a very strong supporter of this kind of collaboration. And of course, thank you to all of you for deciding to spend this Friday afternoon with us. Thank you. I'm particularly pleased to see some of my students here. I know how hard it is to leave our campus, so thank you. I appreciate your being here. And I would recommend to all of you to get close to the screens because the screens are not very big, and will be quoting passages. Peter will be going through the details of some images, so please find a good spot. This is a dialogue between literature and the arts, so Peter and I thought it would be very appropriate that our presentations themselves were a dialogue. So instead of having two separate presentations, we have one single presentation and we'll go back and forth discussing features and episodes of Jerusalem Delivered. We also thought that, unfortunately, Tasso doesn't quite enjoy the same name recognition as some other Italian writers, such as Dante or Machiavelli. So we thought to make this event accessible to anybody interested in the subject matter, regardless of their previous exposure to the poet. Anyway, chances are that if you go to museums or if you enjoy music, chances are you have indeed been exposed to Tasso. A few years ago, a journalist on the Washington Post, Philip Kennicott, wrote a very beautiful article on Torquato Tasso, a poet both obscure and ubiquitous. And he said precisely, if you have been to a museum or to a concert of Italian madrigals, you know Tasso's characters well, even if you have never heard of the poet whose former fame is as astonishing as his current oblivion. And to give you an amusing example, I think, of this phenomenon, I chose a brochure that the Baltimore Museum of Art created to illustrate one of its masterpieces, Van Dyck, Rinaldo, and Armida. The Baltimore Museum of Art put together a brochure to foster appreciation of art in children, and so the children have to recognize the various characters. And there at the bottom you can see it says that the painting was inspired by a poem that was popular in the 1600s, 1600s, it tells a story from the time of the Crusades. Well, that poem is precisely the Gerusalemme Liberata, or Jerusalem Delivered, Tasso's masterpiece. So there you have it. Tasso is surreptitiously entering the minds of innocent children visiting the Baltimore Museum of Art. Anyway, it is kind of ironic that Tasso would be remembered mainly for beautiful love episodes such as Rinaldo and Armida, because that is precisely what he wanted to evolve. In fact, Tasso wrote after the rediscovery of Aristotle's Poetics, when the idea of the unity of time and space that Aristotle had described in Greek tragedy had become essential even in the making of an epic poem. And so Tasso wrote that his poem, not only his poem had unity of action, is the story of the First Crusade, but also unity of agent, he said. There is one main character, the Christian army, with Goffredo at its head and Rinaldo as its right arm. So essentially, this is what Jerusalem Delivered is. It's a poem about the story, it's a fictional account of the First Crusade. So there is a very strong tension towards the goal. The first octave sets and again, perhaps you want to come a little closer to the screen. The first octave, the second line mentions the great tomb of the Savior, so the final goal of the mission, and the epilogue. I'll be using Anthony Esselin's beautiful translation throughout the presentation. So, and the epilogue also mentions the very last line, the great tomb. So, Jerusalem is the goal. Jerusalem as both a concrete place, a city, but also the promise of civil happiness and a symbol of eternal bliss. So not an easy thing to capture when painters tried to give their representation of this idea.
Thank you. Okay. Well, before I begin my remarks, I wanted to say a very warm and deep thanks are necessary for Lucia Wolf, who helped organize this event, and to my partner, Laura. This is, in a lot of ways, a dream come true, to be able to work with a dear colleague who knows so much about Tasso. In the first glimpse of Jerusalem in Bernardo Castello's illustrations for the 1590 Bartoli edition, we see a bustling port with anachronistic ships. In the second canto, Castello's represents Jerusalem as a kind of medieval walled city, more in keeping with the hill towns of Italy than anything in the Holy Land. He is consistent, however, in always depicting a centrally planned church that must stand for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is no longer freestanding as it was and as is often depicted here in a 16th century hand-colored engraving, but rather it's now enmeshed in the walls of previous and subsequent periods of building. What Castello has more accurately communicated is that Jerusalem is a walled city and that the Holy Sepulchre is a polygonal temple surmounted by a large dome, and we'll see that over and over again. Similarly, the trees and plantings in the surrounding landscapes are not palms, acacias, cypresses, and cedars, but the deciduous varieties found in Europe. This holds true for Castello's contemporaries, such as Sisto Badalocchio, here in a scene from Erminia. We'll come back to this later. But I wanted to emphasize here that whereas Castello indicates a pastoral scene with the simplest of elements, a rustic wooden fence with a clear view of Jerusalem behind, Guercino provides instead a vast landscape quite apart from the city, with all manner of flora and fauna, again of a type found more in Italy than the Holy Land.
Beautiful. Well, the road to Jerusalem is long, though, and if we read that first stanza more closely, we realize that there is a problem. There is the effort that Goffredo, the leader, has to make in order to bring together his compagni erranti, or wandering companions, or straying men. Errare is a very powerful word in Italian that conveys two notions that are expressed by two different verbs in English. Errare means both to wander, to roam, but also to be mistaken, to be wrong, to err. So, in other words, a spatial deviation from the path that leads to Jerusalem entails a moral perversion. But there is more. Not only Goffredo's companions are wandering off, but also the narrator presents himself as a peregrino errante, so a wanderer gone astray. And I would say not only the characters and the narrator are always on the verge of losing the right path, but the poem itself, that it seems on the verge of becoming a different kind of poem, a love poem or a pastoral. And this becomes already very clear in the first episode we are going to discuss, the episode of Olindo and Sophronia. The story is quite complex, so I'll try to resume it in a few words. Aladdin, the terrible ruler of Jerusalem, suspects that the Christians have stolen a sacred image and threatens to kill them all. Sophronia, a very modest Christian woman, accuses herself of the theft in order to spare the other Christians. So she's taken to the stake, and this is a very important detail for our purposes, her veil is taken away from her. But at this point, Olindo, who has been secretly loving Sophronia, in turn accuses himself of the theft, at which point Aladdin gets really mad and says, well, then I'm going to kill both of them. So they are taken to the stake and they are tied back to back, at which point Olindo starts this lament, and I hope you can read the translation. I'll read the Italian. Composto all'ordo intorno il rogo mai e già le fiamme il mantice vincita, quando il fanciullo indolorosi lai proruppe e disse a lei che seco unita: questo è dunque quel laccio in Dio sperai teco accoppiarmi in compagnia di vita? Questo è quel fuoco che io credea che i cori ne dovesse infiammar dei uguali ardori? Altre fiamme, altri nodi amor promise, altri ce n'apparecchia iniqua sorte. Piacemi almeno, poiché si strane guise morir pudei, del rogo esser consorte, se del letto non fui. Edo mia sorte avventurosa appieno, o fortunati miei dolci martiri, s'impetrarò che giunto seno a seno l'anima mia nella tua bocca io spiri, e venendo tu meco un tempo meno, in me formandi gli ultimi sospiri. There are already so many characteristics of Tasso's poetry in this passage. First, I would say the Baroque tendency to turn the metaphorical into the literal. So the bonds that Olindo hoped would tie him and Sophronia, the metaphorical bonds of love, are turned into the very harsh ropes that are literally tying them together. The fire that Olindo hoped would inflame both hearts turns into the very real fire that is about to kill both of them. So there is that. There is also Olindo's frustrated eroticism, which I think is very clear in the last passage I read. And there is Tasso's passion for contrast and opposition. In fact, Sophronia, when Sophronia speaks, she uses a completely different tone and basically tells Olindo to stop thinking about lips and breasts and all of that and repent and turn his thought towards the eternal life that they are about to achieve. And I would say also that this episode is an example of Tasso's musical sensibility, because you really can imagine this on a stage or as an opera, because first you have Olindo, the lad broke his sorrows in this cry, so in a very high voice, and Sophronia, who replies tenderly with words of good advice. And then you have the choir that joins in, but even the choir is divided in two groups. You have the Muslims. Here the crowd of pagans raise the cry, so they are very moved by the fate of the two lovers, or the two martyrs almost. And the Christians were a little afraid, are in a difficult situation, so they quietly allowed the Christians wept. So even there you have two different tones. And finally, you even have the effect of the audience as something who can say what? Unusual, soft, into the hard heart of the ruler, cracked. Un non so che, as something who can say what? Je ne sais pas quoi, which is really Tasso's trademark, and is again very prominent in this passage. I should add that the episode has a happy ending because Clorinda, the Muslim warrior woman, arrives and she senses, she understands that Olindo and Sophronia are innocent. She convinces Aladdin to release them, and so the two can get married, which is excellent for Olindo, not so great for Sophronia, who in fact, in the last line, says she will not scorn to spend her life with Olindo, which is not exactly a warm acceptance.
Well, we'll see the way that the artists interpret this. I think they warm her up.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Okay. So, this scene provides, in a nutshell, the principal themes of Jerusalem and Liberata. Both the Christian maiden Sophronia and the Christian soldier Olindo, who loves her, have sacrificed themselves. Sophronia in order to protect her people from Aladino's wrath, and Olindo in order to protect his paramour. The leader of the Muslim forces, Aladino, instead orders, as we've just heard, both of them to be burned at the stake. And just at the moment when the fires are lit and all seems lost, Clorinda, the fearless Muslim warrior, and I'm going to be using the word Muslim because I don't want to have quite the sense of antagonism that is inherent in Tasso himself. I don't want to start range wars over that. In any case, so that's my vocabulary, and she will intervene and spares them. In the earliest illustrated edition by Bernardo Castello, and here, is Diane de Grazia still here? I'm going to just make a shout out to her. She was one of my earliest mentors and knows so much about these prints, and I still go back to her work all the time for information about the prints of the Carracci. In any case, in this first edition, that had engravings both by Giacomo Franco and Agostino Carracci. In this image preceding the second canto, Castello focuses on Goffredo and his troops in their encampment. By contrast, the scene of the near martyrdoms of Sophronia and Olindo is relegated to a small corner of the plaza. Did we see that? Let me see. Not coming out. It's in the walled area. There's a very faint, I'm sorry, kind of an oval around it. Can you see that? In the upper right corner. That's how tiny it is, what's going on in the background. Okay? One could easily overlook this section, and I did myself the first time I looked at it, which is shown here as a lesser episode within the greater narrative. If you look carefully, however, you see that Castello does in fact illustrate the very moment when Olinda and Sophronia are at the stake. The fire's lit, and Clorinda appears in the nick of time. In the third canto, however, Castello chose instead to highlight the first violent encounter between Clorinda and Tancred, and you see her here with her shield over her head. She's a little bit to the left of center. So their first meeting in battle is here. As Laura has explained, Tasso describes the loss of Sophronia's veil and thus of her defenses against the false charge of the theft of the icon. Most artists, from Castello to Cochin, which was also in the little exhibition out here, show Sophronia as modestly dressed but lacking a veil. Thus, I was surprised to find the Neapolitan painter Mattia Preti depicted both Sophronia and Olindo completely nude, here in the version at the Getty. Utterly humiliated and defenseless until Clorinda arrives majestically on her steed to interrupt the lighting of the pyre. A moment that could have ended in martyrdom and sacrifice turns instead to one of salvation. Rather than being consumed by the flames as proto-martyrs to the siege of Jerusalem, Olindo and Sophronia will be free to enjoy the flames of passion. So I think maybe Olindo got his wish here at this time. The sensual and emotional intensity of Preti's painting falls away in the print from the Didot edition, illustrated by Cochin, and I'm putting them side by side, where the forlorn Olindo and Sophronia are fully dressed in what could be confused with 18th century pastoral shepherd costumes.
Well, this is all very, very beautiful, of course, but one may wonder whether an episode like this really should have a place in the Christian epic that Tasso is trying to build. And when Tasso started circulating the manuscript, the readers were puzzled. They thought that the episode was introduced too early in the poem. It's only the second canto. They thought it didn't have any link whatsoever with the main action. They thought it was too lyrical and too sensual, as we have seen. And they thought that the ending, the happy conjugal ending, was contrived. And so Tasso himself, in his letters, he goes back and forth between defending his creation and acknowledging its flaws and its limits. In the meantime, he becomes a little restless. Perhaps his mental health starts to disappear a bit, and for reasons that are not completely clear, is imprisoned in an asylum. And here you can see the rendering of Eugène Delacroix, Tasso in the Asylum, 1839. Tasso was imprisoned in 1579, and he will not regain his freedom until 7 years later. And when it became clear that Tasso would stay in the asylum for a while, the people who had his manuscript decided to publish it against his will. And Tasso never endorsed any of the editions of Jerusalem Delivered that came out. In fact, for the rest of his life, he continued to work on the poem, trying to give his poem the shape that he really thought was fitting a Christian epic. And in 1593, so 2 years before his death, he finally published Jerusalem Conquered, Gerusalemme Conquistata. But I'm making the title, the English title up because it's never been translated into English. This, Tasso wrote, is the poem for which I want to be remembered. This is the heavenly Jerusalem, while Jerusalem Delivered is the earthly Jerusalem. And Tasso died in 1595, so only 2 years after the publication of Gerusalemme Conquistata, and perhaps he was spared the last insult, the realization that the poem for which he wanted to be remembered would never manage to replace Jerusalem Delivered in the hearts and the minds of his public. So the editorial history of Jerusalem Delivered is quite complex.
Thank you. Having fought with censors for years, as we've just learned, upon the reluctant publication of Jerusalem in 1581, Tasso had a bestseller on his hands. Not only was his epic poem immediately famous and printed in multiple editions, it had been published during his lifetime with various commentaries and soon thereafter with illustrations. It was analogous to getting a movie deal for an early modern author. The illustrated editions both acknowledged and expanded the author's renown. At the same time, Tasso's Gerusalemme became the subject of withering criticism from his contemporaries, most damningly from the members of the Accademia della Crusca in Florence. I am illustrating here one of the books from the pro-Tasso camp by Lorenzo Giacomini, a member of the Accademia degli Altarati. But even Galileo weighed in on this matter of the Gerusalemme, but he was against Tasso. Yet this critical discussion, however unsettling to the poet, also served to trumpet his fame. We also witness the significance of Tasso's success in the jealousy of other poets who hoped, usually vainly, to embark on a similar course toward fame. Tasso's contemporary, Gabriello Cabrera, for example, wrote to the artist Bernardo Castello, who sent him a copy of the 1590 edition of the Gerusalemme that he had illustrated, as we've now been looking at many times, and expressed these commingled ideas. For the gift of the Gerusalemme, I offer infinite thanks, for I see in the book excellent figures of poetry and painting. I, who have great affection for Tasso, Hold this book in my hands at every hour. Thus, at every hour, I will be in the presence of your affection and your genius, but about your compliments for my Amediade. I thank you for the sweet inducement to write poetry. Nonetheless, I could not hope to accomplish it, nor even could I hope to achieve such honor. Or more precisely, I could not accept it, being that I am by nature an enemy of presumption. Evidently, however, Cabrera got over his aversion to presumption, for about a decade later, he wrote to Castello to ask for a frontispiece for the Amediade, and to discuss, or could we be surprised at all, the details for illustrations of his epic poem that was published in 1620. These anecdotes point to the fact that Tasso's Gerusalemme was a text beloved by literati and artists from the moment of its publication. Second, to an important cultural reality of the period. Poets and painters had occasion to correspond, and relatedly, that poets and painters took inspiration from one another. Further, the special relationships that existed between artists, including musicians, as we'll see, and poets, often result in some of the most interesting and influential collaborations in our shared culture. Such was the case for Castello, who was introduced to Tasso in 1576 after Gerusalemme had been completed as a text, but before it was ever published. In May 1586, Tasso wrote a letter that Castello had, in his letter, that Castello had passed through Ferrara on his way back from Venice and left with him, that is, with Tasso, a series of drawings. We see some of Castello's drawings here. I'm not sure they were ever the same ones that were in Tasso's hands, but they're from the right period, relating to my poem, as he said. Though it is doubtful, as I said, these are the exact drawings, they show that there's a cordial friendship between the artist and the poet. More important, these exchanges cemented the decision to have Castello's drawings included in a new luxury edition of the Gerusalemme published by Bartoli in 1590. We do not have detailed critical responses from Tasso, but in a letter from their mutual friend, Don Angelo Grillo, the poet spoke frankly about the process of co-creation. I'm quoting here. With regards to my book, I have not changed my opinion. It would not be necessary to change many of the figures by Castello, who is faster at creating the drawings than I am at dealing with them. Nonetheless, his drawing must be similar to the idea that I have envisioned for it. So he really wanted there to be some kind of consonance. So I think this is an interesting kind of irony in the fact that he's simultaneously not wanting it to be published, but wanting to have his hands in whatever comes out. Maybe a new story to be told later.
Yes, yeah.
Although there's a slight sense of reprimand in Tasso's statement because Castello was getting ahead of him, by and large, he liked the figures and the artist's conception of the scenes to be illustrated. The existence of these fragmentary notes suggests that Tasso and Castello conducted a frequent and candid correspondence, now lost. The above letter bespeaks an intimate collaboration between the poet and the artist that began in earnest around 1586 and continued at least through the publication in 1590. Furthermore, it points to the centrality of the Genoese literary and artistic culture in the publication of the early editions of Tasso. For it was in Genoa, too, that the physician and literato named Giulio Guastavini wrote his annotazioni, that is, his commentaries on the Gerusalemme, which helped to redirect the argument about Tasso's place in the literary pantheon from that of a rival to his contemporary Ariosto to that of a rival of the ancients, that of Homer and Virgil. Together, Castello, Guastavini, and the publisher, Bartoli, increased Tasso's fame throughout Europe. On a recent trip to Genoa, I had the opportunity to examine two examples of the first edition, one of which, from Canto Quarto, has a little dingbat, and that's where the arrow is there. At the end, you'll see in pen next to it. And so Canto Quarto and Canto Quinto are reversed. So this must be from one of the very earliest editions before it was in its final form. And as we see here, the images are flipped. The sharp details and the rich ink of the advanced copy give some sense of the original appearance of these illustrations, and it's just in pristine condition. I recommend you're going there. Washington, too, as you've seen in the exhibition, is fortunate to have an outstanding exemplar of the first edition in the Library of Congress's Rosenwald collection. In addition to the outstanding quality of the text and the images to which we will make frequent reference in the course of our dialogue, the Rosenwald edition is ruled throughout. And I wanted you to see this. It's very interesting, and I'd be happy to hear what people think about it. Close looking at the lines of the ruling and those of the text and prints suggests to me that they were intended as guides for the printing process. And if this is true, this would make the Rosenwald volume also one of the earliest in the succession of copies that preceded the release of Jerusalem to a reading public.
In order to move from the earthly Jerusalem to the celestial, heavenly Jerusalem, Tasso was merciless in eliminating episodes that had been very successful, but they did not correspond to his idea of the poem. And so Olinda Sophronia is one of those episodes, so in this metaphorical thread, Tasso just eliminated it from his poem. Which is too bad, because also Sophronia is one of the very few Christian women in Jerusalem delivered. This is a striking feature of the poem. The two different sides are differentiated not only in terms of religion but also of gender. Apart from Sophronia in Jerusalem delivered, there is only another minor female character, Jill Lippe, who is also linked to the theme of marriage, and that's it. Apart from that, it's exclusively male army. On the contrary, women are some of the most important characters on the Muslim side, or the pagan side, as Tasso said, which creates a very strong attraction between the two groups, and many vital errors, many episodes in which the rules of love, the laws of love, prevail over the laws of war. And so it's very interesting, how these two groups are differentiated also in visual terms.
Right, which is what I will be talking about next. Beginning again in these images with the Bartoli edition, Costello made several easily identifiable differences between the Muslim and Christian soldiers in the vast Cecil B. DeMille panoramas that we see of the battlefield. Costello clearly marks the Muslim soldiers as wearing turbans, carrying rectangular shields, usually with a crescent moon, and occasionally bearing a large mustache. The Christians are shown with heavy metal helmets and metal armor in the form of a cuirass with shoulder guards, or at least a breastplate, protecting their thighs in an ancient style leather skirt. Their legs and knees are otherwise bare, and on their feet they wear Roman style greaves. In doing a bit of research on armor, I learned that during the First Crusade, soldiers would more typically have worn chainmail. Plate armor was only introduced in the 13th century. So for both the poorly protected Muslim troops and the Christian three-quarter covered soldiers, anachronisms abound, also imprecisions. However, Costello succeeds in allowing the viewer to scan the armies and figure out which side they represent very quickly. The women are sometimes shown in full armor. Here we see Clorinda and Herminia in different sides, but at other times they wear long flowing skirts and gowns, as we'll see soon enough with our discussion of Armida. These anomalies could be seen as either breaches of decorum or verisimilitude and the Aristotelian unities, or as necessary visual evidence that discloses identity in order to preserve the greater integrity of the narrative. There's another film version by Carlo Ludovico Bragaglia, I wanted to share with you, in this wonderful poster from 1957. This, clearly, we know exactly what we're looking at, and I recommend it to you as well worth a binge watch. In addition to the poster, there are some other film stills online, and here we see Cinecittà's version of a swords and sandals extravaganza. The stereotypes of the Muslim soldier need no comment. Of course, these notions of difference, whether gender-based or cultural, also implicated both readers and viewers in the early modern period. The massing of the Islamic soldiers as a vast, undifferentiated army, for instance, lessens one's empathy for the individual who might be captured, banished, or worse, slaughtered. And many times people are said to be torn to pieces or cut to pieces in the narrative. Equally interesting, as Laura has pointed out, is that women in the Gerusalemme tend to be the characters who best and most effectively disguise themselves in order to cross over between religions, cultures, and amorous pursuits.
Yes, as an example of love that unites members of the, or at least that tries to unite members of the two opposite groups, we may look no further than the episode of Herminia among the shepherds. Herminia is a Muslim queen who had been captured by Tancredi, a Christian knight, and later released, but only literally released, as Tasso says, because metaphorically she's still a prisoner of Tancredi's because she has fallen in love with him. And so, although she's now safe within Jerusalem, she longs to be with Tancredi, so she ventures out. But in order to venture out, she needs to steal Clorinda's armor. So we see this other theme of mistaken identities, confusion. And so she ventures out, but two guards see her, they think she is Clorinda, and they start chasing her. So she runs away, she gallops away, and then when she's finally exhausted, she dismounts from her horse and she falls asleep. And when she wakes up in a different poem. Right? And as this passage, again, I hope you can read the translation. Non si destò finché garrir gli augelli non sentì lieti e salutare gli albori e mormorare il fiume e gli arboscelli e con l'onda scherzar l'aura coi fiori. Apre languidi lumi e guarda quegli alberghi solitari dei pastori e parla in voce udir tra l'acqua e i rami che i sospiri e al pianto la richiami. Ma sonne che mentre ella piange i suoi lamenti rotti da un chiaro suon che a lei ne viene, che sembra ed è di pastorali accenti misto e di boscarecce inculte avere. Vedendo qui ricomparir repente l'insolite armi sbigottir costoro, ma li saluta Erminia e dolcemente li affida e gli occhi scopre e i becchi d'oro. So notice that first of all now Erminia reveals her true identity. She's not a warrior, she's a woman. But notice also that the landscape around Jerusalem that had been described by Tasso as a desert, essentially, now becomes the setting for a pastoral. It is literally a different poem with the shepherds who play and sing tunes.
Right. That's a great segue, thank you. And as mentioned earlier, and just now, pastoral landscapes became one of the most beloved settings for 17th century artists and literati. Thus, the episode of Herminia and the shepherds is a frequent subject from Tasso in prints and paintings. In addition to the leafy and abundant landscapes, artists were drawn to Tasso's description of two compelling themes: the sound of the children playing pipes that attracted Herminia in the first place to the shepherd's home, and the quick succession of emotions that the young boys and their father experience. When they first see her, you'll see it's very minimally understandable, but if you know the poem, you understand there's a little frisson moment here where they're scared. They don't know. They think she is a warrior. Okay? At this point, her identity is completely hidden beneath Clorinda's armor, and they are sore afraid. The minute that Herminia removes her helmet, however, the shepherds are put at ease, and they entreat her to remain with them, and she's tempted. This scene finds many interpreters, including Guercino, Sistobalocchio, and others. I wanted to make certain that you would at least be introduced to this clever reimagining of the scene by the Florentine artist Santi di Tito as a family portrait. Here, the mother is Erminia, the father is the shepherd, and the 3 children are the pipers. Further, I wanted to bring to your attention something closer at hand. At the National Gallery of Art, we are fortunate to have 2 grand 18th century canvases from a Venetian palace painted by the brothers Antonio and Gian Francesco Guardi, one depicting Erminia and the shepherds, and the other, Carlo and Ubaldo encounter the sirens while searching for Rinaldo, a scene that we'll come up to next.
Well, Erminia, I think we have another slide here.
Yes.
Erminia was one of Tasso's most original creations, starting with the name. Tasso invented the name Erminia. And yet, as you can imagine, when Tasso went back to his poem, he thought that there was no place for this pastoral interlude in the Christian epic. So also Erminia disappears. However, some other episodes were too tightly embedded in the poem. They were in fact not episodes but full-fledged stories and could not easily be eliminated. And one of the most famous is the story of Rinaldo and Armida. Armida is a Muslim enchantress who manages to distract many Christians from their mission. She's, in fact, I would claim, Goffredo's real antagonist, because Goffredo represents a centripetal force that binds the army together and propels it towards Jerusalem, while Armida embodies the opposite principle, multiplicity, variety, a centripetal force that encourages the soldiers to follow their instinct instead of their duty. And Armida is very close to celebrating her triumph when Rinaldo, so the imaginary ancestor of the Este family for which Tasso writes, as well as the right arm of the Christian army in Tasso's view of the single agent in his poem, Rinaldo is asleep and is about to be killed by Armida. And then Armida makes the fatal mistake. She looks at Rinaldo. Rinaldo is so beautiful and she falls in love with him. And the last 2 lines say, E sulla vada fronte pende mai sì che par Narciso al fonte. Like Narcissus at the pool, she hung upon his lovely face. So already from the very beginning, there is a very strong narcissistic element in the love between Armida and Rinaldo.
Thank you. Laura has set the stage beautifully for Nicolas Poussin's Rinaldo and Armida. In his book on Poussin and the Poetics of Painting, Jonathan Unglaub offers a penetrating analysis of the artist's interpretation. He calls our attention to the sparseness of the barren landscape and the single figure of Eros, or Cupid, rather than having an army of putti that many other artists would do. The better to focus our attention on the moment when love, literally love as amor, love as Cupid, restrains Armida from plunging her dagger into Rinaldo's chest. Only love, he says, has the power to disarm hostility. Just so, Armida's hatred transforms into intense love, which is communicated both in the interruption of her murderous plot and in the intensity of her gaze, squarely locked on Rinaldo's face. In the next scene, also by Poussin, the smitten Armida prepares to take the sleeping Rinaldo back to her enchanted island. And one of the few versions to show the actual transport, I'm leading us through the narrative here, is by Domenico Fiesella, one of my favorites from Genoa, who depicts Armida's flying chariot laden with flowers.
This is beautiful. And so, in fact, Armida decides to take Rinaldo to the Isole Fortunate, so which are usually identified with the Canary Islands. And so she takes him there in her beautiful garden, which is also a beautiful building, a beautiful palace. Tondo è il ricco edificio, e nel più chiuso grembo di lui, che quasi centro al giro, un giardin vaca adorno e sopra l'uso di quanti più famosi unque fioriro. D'intorno inosservabile e confuso ordin di logge demon fabbri ordiro, e tra le oblique vie di quel fallace ravvolgimento impenetrabile giace. So the first word here is tondo, circular. So Armida's circular universe is the negation of Goffredo's straight itinerary towards Jerusalem. And so Armida and Rinaldo enjoy the garden's eternal spring.
Right. Well, I think we can move to the next, to the mirror.
To the next one. And the garden's eternal
We'll see
spring.
the gardens in a minute.
Do not worry, do not despair. But we also see what Rinaldo and Armida do in the garden, and among other things, they perform complex love rituals. In particular, the scene of the mirror, where the Armida takes care of her hair and she looks herself in the mirror, and Rinaldo helps her. Where is it?
That's
Here
it.
yeah. Dal fianco dell'amante estraneo arnese un cristallo pendea lucido e netto. Sorse e quel tra le mani a lui sospese ai misteri d'amor ministro eletto. Con luce ella ridenti e con accese mirano in vari oggetti un solo oggetto. Ella del vetro a sé fa specchio ed egli gli occhi di lei sereni a sé fa spegli. I must have read these verses 100 times and I still have problems understanding precisely what they mean, right? They are so beautiful, so musical, and yet when you try to pinpoint exactly what is he saying, you are in trouble. And I think this is not it's not that Tasso is making a mistake, but on the contrary, here is both representing Armida's charm and pointing at the fact that that charm leads to confusion, to gender confusion, and also literally to the loss of meaning. I think this is why these lines are so problematic.
Exactly. And we see one of the scenes here, again from the Bartoli edition here at the Library of Congress, as diverting and interesting as these parts of the love story are, some of the most fascinating from an art historical perspective are those that involve gazes and reflections. While under Armida's spell, Rinaldo is incapable of seeing himself as he is. Rather, he only perceives himself through his reflection in her eyes, and we'll see that better in other versions. For instance, Annibale Carracci, who understood exactly what Tasso was trying to say, I think.
Yeah.
So if we had more time, I would develop an idea of pictorial intelligence, which I would say is equally as refined as literary intelligence, but I think he really gets it. Here, Armida is pictured as gazing at her reflection in the mirror, while Rinaldo stares rather vapidly into her eyes. He's no longer dressed as a soldier. The only thing that's left is his sword. I think we'll hear more about that. His limply placed sword, without saying more. And he is now a louche courtier in her enthrall.
Yes, absolutely. And this is a love that can only blossom in a place removed from war, from battle, from the making of history. But history and war enter the garden when Carlo and Ubaldo, two Christian warriors, manage to fulfill their mission and rescue Rinaldo. They take advantage of Armida's momentary absence and present Rinaldo with a shield. And this shield, interestingly enough, is another mirror. But as Maggie Gunsberg has pointed out, it's a mirror that serves the opposite function than Armida's mirror. So while Armida's mirror fostered narcissism and confusion, this mirror instills guilt and awareness. In other words, by looking at this reflection in the mirror, Rinaldo sees himself as an unworthy member of a social group of the Christian army. Basically, he has recovered his sense of social expectations, if we can say so. And indeed, the dangling sword, effeminate at his side, is very prominent also in Tasso's lines here.
Thank you. It is not until Carlo and Ubaldo, who have been sent by Goffredo and the Christian troops to retrieve Rinaldo, espy their commander, that they help to reveal their leader to himself through seeing his own reflection. Here from a Florentine anonymous fresco cycle, but you see, it's one of the rare versions where they show the actual moment of the reflective shield, which is supposed to have like a diamond-like surface. Am I right about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And this weapon, a much more masculine one, the polished diamond surface of the shield. And in that moment, Rinaldo awakens to his true appearance and at once vows to leave Armida's island. To return briefly to the version by Annibale Carracci, do you see in the background Carlo and Ubaldo with the shield that glints just a little bit of light, hinting at what's to come?
It's fascinating how painters have to represent various moments in the story, right?
Yeah, exactly.
With different hints, different clues. As you probably figured out by now, none of the love stories of the Liberata have a happy ending. This is what Tasso himself wrote in one of his letters. But no story is as tragic as the one of Tancredi and Clorinda. We have already mentioned these two characters. Clorinda is the warrior woman who in Canto 2 rescued Olindo and Sophronia, while Tancredi is the Christian soldiers whom Erminia loved. But Tancredi did not love Erminia because he loved Clorinda. He loved Clorinda because simply because he had seen her once by a stream without her helmet on, and he had fallen madly in love with her. And it's a love that becomes an obsession. They have very few, in fact you mentioned earlier on, one of the few encounters in battle that they have, before Canto 12, which is really their canto, the canto of Tancredi and Clorinda. Canto 12 begins with era notte, like Virgil, nox erat. So it was nighttime, which seems a mere chronological remark, but actually introduces one of the main protagonists of the canto, the night which generates confusion, darkness, and tragic misunderstandings. Clorinda is within Jerusalem, and she is restless. She thinks that she should go outside the wall of Jerusalem to set on fire a war machine, a mobile tower that the Christians have used quite successfully that day. But in order to go out unnoticed, she decides not to wear her usual armor, and she dons a dark armor. Depon Clorinda le sue spoglie in teste d'argento e l'elmo adorno e l'arme altere, e senza piuma o fregio altre ne veste. In Fausto annunzio, rugginose e nere, però che stima agevolmente in queste occulta andar fra le nemiche schiere. An omen full of fear, Esselin writes. So there seems to be something strange about Clorinda's armor. And her servant, Arsete, who has taken care of her since she was a baby, decides that this is the right time to tell Clorinda her real story. A real story is quite complex, but the main points are that Clorinda was born in Ethiopia, and she was born from Christian parents. And then, for a complex set of circumstances, her mother had to entrust her to Arsete. Arsete had raised her as a Muslim. And he had neglected to baptize her, as Clorinda's mom had recommended. But now Arsete just had a dream, and in the dream Saint George has appeared and has urged him to baptize Clorinda before it is too late. And this is the story that Arsete tells Clorinda. But Clorinda decides, nevertheless, that she wants to, that she believes in her faith, so and decides to venture out to complete this mission. And in fact, she goes out, she sets the tower on fire, then she tries to get back into Jerusalem, but the door is locked at the wrong time. And this is what Tasso expresses beautifully, I think, with this octave, which begins aperte l'aurea porta, so the golden gate is opened, and then it ends with the door is, e chiuse poi la porta e solo Clorinda esclusa, so the door is 1, 2, Clorinda is shut out, and the following octave starts by emphasizing the same concept, sola esclusa ne fu, so shut alone is she. So she's in this, really in this this no man's or no woman's land, where she's among enemies, although those enemies she has just learned are really the group to which she belongs by birth. Yet it's nighttime, so Clorinda hopes that thanks to her disguise she'll be able to go unnoticed. And in fact, she almost manages, but Tancredi manages to see her. And Tancredi makes a tragic mistake. Sol Tancredi avvien che lei conosca. Of this it chanced that the one man aware was Tancred. Conosca, Tasso says, which is a very ambiguous verb. In modern Italian, the difference between conoscere, so to meet for the first time, and riconoscere, to recognize, is very clear. But this was not the case in the 16th century, where conoscere could mean either thing, either could convey either meaning. So, for a moment, the reader thinks that Tancredi has recognized Clorinda, but what follows make clear that that's not at all the case. In fact, Tancredi thinks that Clorinda is a man, and he follows her and challenges her to a duel. And this va girando con lei l'alpestre cima, she sought some other gate to enter town, is the beginning of Monteverdi's combattimento. Yes. that you'll discuss later on. So they begin this furious fight that has some really tragic and almost disturbing undertones, where the language of love and the language of war coincide. For instance, this passage, 3 volte il cavalier la donna stringe con le robuste braccia ed altrettante da quei nodi tenaci ella si cinge, nodi di fer nemico e non d'amante. So for a tragic perversion, what should have been a lover's embrace has turned into an enemy's deadly grip. So they fight throughout the night, but as the sun rises from the east, Tancredi formulates a request. He says, it's really a shame that we don't know each other's name. Who are you? And this is a very common request in chivalric literature, but the reader can perceive a tragic urgency and a tragic irony in Tancredi's request. His problem is precisely that he doesn't know the name of his mysterious opponent. But Clorinda refuses to reveal her identity, and the fight resumes, and Clorinda is wounded to death, and she's about to die. And as she is about to die, she formulates a request. She asks that she be baptized. So she asks to be baptized. At which point, Tancredi goes to a nearby stream, fills his helmet with water, and goes back to the dying warrior. And as you can see here, he has almost a premonition while he's trying to free the warrior's face from the helmet. Tremar sentì la mano mentre la fronte non conosciuta ancora sciolse e scoprì. And then there is the tragic revelation. La vide, la conobbe e restò senza e voce e moto. hai vista, hai conoscenza. And notice how these last lines with their staccato, with their rapid succession of short, essential sentences conveys the change in perspective in Tancredi. Because up to that point, Tancredi has been fighting, running, and chasing ghosts, but only now he realizes what he has really done. So Tancredi Clorinda, probably the most tragic creation in the Jerusalem Deliver. An episode that is at the same time coherent as a narration and skillful as a work of poetry. Tasso uses a number of poetic devices, alliteration, enjambement, assonance, and broad dichotomies, male and female, death and salvation, night and day, to tell a suspenseful story. But I think that the real reason for the enduring success of these episodes lies in its universal theme. Tancredi's problem is that he fails to recognize his beloved until it is too late. This is the thread that unites the different stages of the episode, from that first ironic solo Tancredi avviene che lei conosca, of this chance that the one man aware was Tancred, to the tragic revelation, la vide, la conobbe, e restò senza e voce e moto. Notice that the verbs are the same, conoscere e vedere, perhaps in the translation that goes lost a bit, but those are the same verbs that Tasso uses. So therefore, the real theme of the episode is the failure to acknowledge, recognize, understand, embrace otherness. A theme that resonates throughout the centuries and for all of us. And I think this is the reason why Tancredi and Clorinda would continue to strike each other as warriors and miss each other as lovers in the works of many painters and composers, right? Because it's an extremely successful episode.
Absolutely, yeah. As we'll see, and interpreted in many different ways, or different aspects are highlighted. Throughout this dialogue, I've been concentrating on the early graphic representations of Gerusalemme, because they were most often the first ones produced and in many ways the most influential to the artists who followed. Not only did a significant number of artists own the illustrated editions of Tasso, which provided rich visual material, they were undoubtedly responding to the argomenti and the privileging of the particular scenes by the commentators and the illustrators. Among the first of the painted responses to Tasso is a powerfully foreshortened view of the conversion of Clorinda by Domenico Tintoretto. Having fought through the entire night, Tancred and Clorinda are seen just as dawn breaks in the background. Tintoretto augmented the terrestrial light with a dazzling heavenly vision of two seraphim accompanying the dove of the Holy Ghost. Any of you who know scenes of baptism of Christ often see the same kinds of images. This divine apparition serves as a kind of exclamation point to the Counter-Reformation themes that adhere to Tasso's epic, though they are not specifically described by him. Together, the angels and breaking dawn turn the carpet of plants a golden hue. The raking angles of the figures draw our attention to the subtle details of Tasso's verses. Clorinda's ashen face, and these are Tasso's words, like violets mixed with lilies, and her mortal wound from whence blood has stained her blouse, on one hand, and the swiftly running Tancred. Note, for instance, his extended left leg, who arrives with the water for baptism at the precise moment she is about to expire. By contrast, Sisto Ballocchio orients the scene parallel to the picture plane and draws the viewer in with the brilliant light that bathes Clorinda's bare and bloodied chest. Although we can again see dawn breaking in the distance, Clorinda, having declared her conversion and receiving baptism from the hand of Tancred, herself appears to be a source emanating light. There is no heavenly apparition, rather a more naturalistic, or in the words of the period, verosimile, kind of interpretation. Yet this internally generated light beatifies Clorinda, who looks more like a martyred saint than a dying war heroine. Similarly, Battolocchio sets his narrative in a verdant landscape far from the walls of Jerusalem, which we barely glimpse in the background. At the same time, the counter-reformatory message is balanced by the tender clasp of Tancred and Clorinda's proper left hands and the ambiguity of their gazes. Whereas Tancred concentrates on the act of baptism, Clorinda looks lovingly at him, not toward heaven. The balance of sacred and profane in Battolocchio's painting is pushed to its most contumacious extreme in Giovanni Bilivert's version, in which Clorinda has lost not only her helmet, but every shred of clothing. I wanted to add to that, in the cinematic version, again from our 1957 extravaganza, we see the exhausted warriors helmetless and sprawled on the bank of a river, but with no visible wounds or even a drop of sweat. I'd like to turn now to one of the grandest early responses to Tasso's epic, which was found not in Italy, but in France, though the patron was the Italian-born Maria de' Medici, who married Henri IV, Henry IV, in 1600. In the Cabinet de la Reine at Fontainebleau, Marie commissioned Ambroise Dubois to paint a suite of canvases on themes taken from Jerusalem. Not surprisingly, all of the episodes concern female protagonists: Clorinda, Sophronia, and from Heliodorus' novel, an Ethiopian story that focuses on Chariclea. And some of you may know Joni Spicer at the Walters Art Museum. She's written about Chariclea and Clorinda as Ethiopian princesses. Foremost among these large-scale paintings is the combat of Tancred and Clorinda. Here we see it, which bears comparison to the composition of Domenico Mona in his drawing from the third canto. Instead of the nonviolent meeting, Dubois has chosen the heat of battle, where the two ill-fated lovers, unknown to one another despite being only clad with armor and wearing helmets that reveal their faces, are about to wield, I know it's crazy, you have to suspend a lot of disbelief. They're about to wield their swords. Since this is a painting cycle and not an illustrated book, the artist and patron freely select which cantos to highlight and which ancillary scenes to depict. Here we find not only the combattimento, but also the rarely represented scenes of the birth of Clorinda, which is lost, but this one is here, Tancred and Clorinda at the fountain, which is what you described as a stream, here interpreted by Dubois as a fountain. The moment that Tancred's love first blossoms here. Clorinda seems rather indifferent up to the very end, from the first canto in Ottavi 46 to 47, and to Tancred in front of the walls of Jerusalem. And I wanted to show next a very rare scene, but was mentioned by Laura, of Clorinda before Arcete, this in another drawing by Domenico Mona. Yes, and in this one is the moment of the telling of the long tale of how she's connected to her Christian family, including, in some people's imaginations, Prester John. So it really has far-reaching meaning. This is the complete cycle, the one I had been looking at with Dubois, of the encounters between Tancred and Clorinda, and I bring it to your attention for its relevance to Monteverdi's Combattimento, as there is nothing comparable in Italian art. But if Monteverdi's intervention is more like a musical explication de texte, Dubois' is a visual concordance in which every scene where Tancred and Clorinda appear is brought to life. Unlike Dubois' cycle, Monteverdi drew his entire text from the 12th canto, octaves 52 to 62 and 64 to 68. In addition to allowing the composer to maintain Aristotle's unities of time, space, and action, the selections of these episodes provided a strongly pro-Christian, anti-Turk, or anti-Muslim message for the Venetian audience gathered for a performance of the combattimento in the palace of Girolamo Mocenigo, who was the proveditore of the Venetian state, and this was during Lent carnival season of 1624. Tasso's fertile poetry offers many opportunities to artists and composers. They saw different things or inflected different actions and emotions within the same text. For example, Monteverdi's libretto for the combattimento omits the final scene of the transport of Clorinda to the Christian camp, which is in Castello. He emphasizes the movement of the figures from one field to the, I need to go one more. There. To the next. And closely following Tasso's text, Monteverdi chooses to preserve the Aristotelian unity of place and thus has both the conversion and the death of Clorinda occur on the battlefield. Monteverdi inserts a narrator called testo, and thus the text becomes a character in the opera, and one that allows both Tancred and Clorinda to enact a choreographed battle, and we'll see a little snippet of this at the very end, while he describes the action, as well as two principal actors, and brings us into the scene in medias res. The combattimento was written in what Monteverdi called the genere rappresentativo, by which historians of music believe he meant a theatrical mode. Before the original performance, which occurred around 1624 in the private residence I mentioned during the season of Carnival, the first audience had no clue what they would witness. They were enjoying the diversions of a soirée with strolling musicians and conversation. The characters entered unexpectedly during the course of singing madrigals, Clorinda in armor, followed by Tancred on a cavallo mariano. Let me explain. This term has variously been interpreted as a kind of caparisoned hobby horse emblazoned with symbols of the Virgin Mary, or possibly as a typo for a cavallo marino, or seahorse. Personally, I would love for it to be the latter. A seahorse would make the setting for the opera in a Venetian palace all that much more marvelous and of the period. Monteverdi's own description in his 8th book of Madrigals of Love and War speaks volumes about his intentions and the reception of the first performance. They will perform, these are his words, steps and gestures in the way expressed by the oration, nothing more, nothing less. Observing diligently those measures, blows, and steps, and the instrumentalists will follow and perform sounds excited and soft, in Italian, suoni incitati e molli. And testo, delivering the words in measure in such a way that the three actions come to unite in a unified imitation. Clorinda will speak when appropriate, testo silent, and similarly Tancredi. The instruments, that is, 4 viole da braccio, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, and a contrabbasso da gamba, which is the continuo with the harpsichord, should be played in imitation of the passions of the oration. Testo's voice should be clear, firm, and with good delivery, somewhat distanced from the instruments, so that the oration may be better understood. He must not make gorghe or trilli, which I don't know if we have any music historians here, but those are ornamentations from the period. So it's supposed to be very limited, unadorned music for the most part. For the rest, he will deliver words according to the passions of the oration. And in this manner, now 12 years ago, it was performed in the palace of the most illustrious and most excellent Signor Girolamo Mocenigo, my particular lord, with all refinement, given that he is a knight of excellent and delicate taste, and in carnival time, since it was an evening pastime, in the presence of all the nobility, who remained moved by the emotion of compassion in such a way as almost to let forth tears. And the audience applauded it for being a song of a kind never before heard. Monteverdi's combattimento introduced many novità, or novelties, to music performance. It is said to be the first instance of the use of pizzicato and tremolo in the strings, which together added more agitation and excitement to the singing in what he called the concitato, or aroused manner. In fact, the instrumentalists and the singers often act independently of one another. There's much more to be said, of course, about Monteverdi's great achievements in this rarely performed opera, but I don't want to defer your pleasure much longer. The presentation of the video will make things clearer than any exegesis could hope to do. So in closing, it's important to remember that the first performance came as a complete surprise to all in attendance. Perhaps these two reimaginings of the combattimento, one from the 17th century that we looked at just a minute ago, Billy Vert, and one from the 21st century, will serve a similar purpose. Here, President Obama is Tancred, the unidentified woman, maybe it's Hillary, is Clorinda, and the Secret Service man is Testo. Badalocchio's version that we've been looking at will be our final one. Talking, laughing, dancing, and certainly gambling, Monteverdi drew the raucous guests into a single focused activity. In keeping with the poetic and artistic conventions of the period, the Rappresentazioni played shamelessly on the affetti, or the effects and emotions of the spectators. The problem for Monteverdi was communicating sympathy for the protagonists when they have so few lines. Thus, the character of Testo is charged with filling in all of the details of action and narrative tissue. Meanwhile, the instrumentalists are heightening emotions and painting sound pictures that provide a physical setting for the actors. When Clorinda, newly baptized, draws her last breath and sees heaven opening before her, the audience is expected to be overcome with emotion. In Tasso's treatise, Dell'arte Poetica, he stated that the poet's role is to move the reader to anger, pity, or terror, to joy, or to sadness. The original audience wept not because of Monteverdi's music and stagecraft, but because they knew Tasso's Gerusalemme so well. It was the startling representation or re-representation of Tasso's poetry in Monteverdi's aroused mode within a theatrical production in an unexpected setting of a palace that caused them to experience the epic in a new way. And we hope that your encounter, whether the first or the 21st, will now be similarly informed. This excerpt runs just about 3 minutes, and I chose the 1993 production from the Netherlands Opera because it was performed in costume with period musicians as Monteverdi wanted off stage and the three principals on stage. Testo is performed by Guy de May, who sings and emotes as Tancred, played by Martin Königsberger, and Clorinda, Lorna Anderson, is our Clorinda. They sing only when Tasso has supplied them with dialogue. When they challenge each other to fight, to war and death, when Tancred begs his opponent to name him, or in this case herself, he didn't know, only to confess that she was responsible for burning the Christians' war machine, further angering Tancred, the battle ensues, and finally, the recognition of the dying Clorinda, who forgives Tancred and asks for him to baptize her. Remember, as I said, and as Laura has said, she descends from Christian ancestors. And before she expires, Tancred's interior dialogue is voiced by Testo. Stupefied he is, as Laura explained, mute and motionless. Ai vista, ai conoscenza, O unhappy sight, O woeful knowledge. And at last, as she dies, she bids him, farewell, I die in peace. So if I can do this properly now, there's a little bit of technology here, and I think it's down here on the, yes, good. And it should open where I marked it. This is Testo. Can we do the larger screen? Thank you.
So we have a few minutes left if anybody wants to ask some questions. This was wonderful. Thank you very much. That was a treat.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll take some questions if you have any.
Oh, that's the fire crackling,
Yeah.
by the way, at the end here. In case you're wondering what the noise is. Nobody's eating a snack.
Yes.
I was thinking about Machiavelli's version, and since we know that Machiavelli was very, he had like a very strong sensibility. I wonder if he actually was aware about that kind of sexual passage in the Liberata. And he spent a lot of time in Naples, and he knew a lot of intellectuals in Naples. So, what do you think? This very, very explicit, sensual scene in the case of Machiavelli. So, probably we can we establish like a link between the text and the perception of the artist.
Yeah, please, you can respond.
No. It's
Well, it's a painting, right?
It's a
Okay.
painting.
Absolutely, that's what I believe as well, is that he's making explicit what is only implicit in the very racy words that Tasso used. It's not nearly as ribald as it becomes in Preti's painting, but yet there's that undercurrent of sexual tension that's in the text, and we might want to say more about that.
Absolutely. There's this kind of the transformation of Clorinda in a completely different female model, right? From the threatening warrior woman to the Petrarchan ideal. In fact, the language really mirrors Petrarca when she in the crucial parts of the duel and when she converts. So there is definitely an erotization of Clorinda, who had up to that moment completely neglected love. So absolutely, it's absolutely there.
So, go ahead. I was going to say, though, that you're linking in beautifully here both the erotic scene of Sophronia and the erotic scene of Clorinda, as again taking things from the text and making a kind of poetic interpretation on the basis of the artist.
So Tasso presents us with a new conception of love, a love that is somehow oscillating between the inability to distinguish between friend and foe. Because it just seems that all the sentiments arise from this confusion. So I was wondering if you could talk us, especially at this historical moment, expanding the consciousness of the life and the world. If you could tell us a little bit about what you think about Tasso's conception of love and how it's different than, let's say, Petrarcha's conception of love, or later, in Dante's conception of love. How would you characterize Tasso's conception of love?
Mm-hmm. Well, for Tasso, it is already critics from Francesco de Sanctis had pointed out in Tasso there are two different worlds, really, what he says that he wants to do and what he actually ends up doing. So in his letters is very clear. He says, in my poem, the love is the instrumento del diavolo, it's the devil's tool. So love is there only to be destroyed, essentially, only to be defeated at the end, right? And in one of the first stanzas, he says that basically his poetry and love are only the sugar-coating for the bitter medicine that the reader is going to swallow. So essentially, he has a moral message, and love is supposed to make it more agreeable, but at the end, what matters is the message. That's what he says he intends to do. But then, as we have seen, these characters is very convincing when he talks about love, and these characters seem to take a life of their own. And so when he tried to, in a way, to really limit all of that and come out with the Jerusalem Conquistata, the public didn't follow that. So he seems to be championing a different and more moral way of love. Luckily for us, he actually succeeded in expressing some of the most beautiful love stories that have ever been written.
On that note, a beautiful note, love. if you're done. If you're not, we will continue, but I think it's time to wrap this up. I'm sorry if I interrupted.
No, we just wanted to thank everybody, including our public. Thank you so much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.